Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about universities in Canada. Adam Lotesto is a recruitment officer at the University of Toronto. Formerly, Adam was an actor for the Second City Touring Company and Tony and Tina's Wedding. Alexander Leipziger is a U.S. national and a graduate of the University of Toronto. For 3 years, Alex was responsible for academic relations at the Canadian Embassy in Washington and now works at the World Bank. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. Adam, maybe if we could start with you, and I hope you don't mind this question, but we have 3,000 colleges and universities in the United States. Why would an American student want to go to a school in Canada?
Sure. Well, that's a great question, and that's something that I certainly get asked quite often. In Canada, there are less than 100 universities, and they're predominantly public universities. There's only a handful of private ones. And one of the main things I think that students should be aware of is that the Canadian education system is regarded very highly around the world. It's a very strong quality of education. So that is a really good feature for students, especially when they're looking to apply to or apply for jobs or graduate schools. Graduate schools especially know about the quality of education in Canada. So what you're getting is a very strong, highly regarded education system, and that would be, I guess, one of the main selling points that I would want to share with students and parents watching, is that the Canadian education system, very highly regarded.
And Alex, you, as an American student, did exactly that.
Yes, I did. I actually grew up here in the Washington, D.C. area. I went to the Murray School here in D.C. and went to the University of Toronto. And
when you were thinking about it, did your parents support that? Did your Uncle Joe or Aunt Thelma support that?
My parents both supported that. They, in fact, let me know about Canadian schools, that they were very high quality and really not as far away as you would think. I've visited a couple of schools in Canada and ended up applying to the University of Toronto, and really enjoyed my visit there, and decided to go there for school.
And what advice would you give for students who are thinking about that now? Maybe they've never been to Canada. Maybe they don't even have a passport.
Well, I would first encourage them to get a passport, because I think that it's good not just to visit Canada, but to other countries in the world. But just to find out a little bit more about Canadian schools, because there are, I think one benefit really of the Canadian model is that you have a number of different schools of varying sizes. So you have small, sort of more liberal arts style colleges, or what we would consider here in the U.S. to be colleges, as well as sort of more medium-sized universities, and then you have larger programs with doctoral degrees, medical schools, and so there's a wide array of schools, but the overall quality of all of them is very high.
Well, maybe if we can make this even more global, and Adam, as you know, other countries are also trying to recruit American students, particularly in Scotland. There are a lot of Scottish recruiters floating around Washington and New York and Philadelphia. Why would an American student go to a Canadian school and not a school in the UK or in Scotland in particular?
Sure, and I mean those schools there are excellent, and the quality of education is also strong. I think one of the benefits being that we are the neighbors to the north, so it's a much shorter distance for students to come to visit, to come and study. When they want to go home to visit their folks over the holidays, it's not far away. You're a day's drive, in our case, to Toronto, or a short plane ride. So the proximity is one thing. The Canadian economy is doing okay. It's certainly doing, I think, better than it is here in the U.S., so that's another strong feature or selling point, is that our graduates, after they complete their studies at U of T, can find jobs. It's a more seamless transition. So I guess to summarize and to keep it simple, shorter distance, usually cheaper when you factor in the cost of flying out to the UK versus driving or taking a train or a short plane ride to Canada. Those would be, I guess, some of the main reasons why I think a student should or perhaps would consider Canada over the UK.
Well, can we say a word or two about the cost? Like, for instance, what's the tuition at the University of Toronto, and how would that compare to, let's say, Syracuse University or Cornell University or schools in New York State?
Sure. Overall, studying in Canada is much more affordable. The low end of tuition would be around $10,000. The high end would be around $32,000. So again, depending on what area you'd like to study in, it can be $10,000 is, I would say, a very good deal for students to get a strong quality of education. And even if you're at the higher end, as the University of Toronto is, if students are looking out of state, I think that it's safe to say our tuition fees are comparable to those of out of state. And when students start to look a little further, they'll probably see that we rank very highly. And we might outrank a lot of schools that might have been on their list, and we could end up being $20,000 cheaper. So, you know, again, just to summarize, education in Canada overall is considered more affordable without compromising in the quality, and between $10,000 to $32,000, you know, depending on where you'd like to go, that's those are your options.
Fair enough. And Alex, when you were at the Canadian Embassy, presumably you fielded questions like this quite a bit.
Certainly. And
in terms of that, what are the universities besides the University of Toronto that you were asked about a lot?
Sure. Well, I would take a step back from that and say that, you know, a good place to find out more about what the wide array of Canadian universities is the Maclean's Guide, M-A-C-L-E-A-N-S. Maclean's Guide. It's online and it provides rankings that are comprehensive for all Canadian schools, and it breaks them down on undergraduate, sort of medium-sized, and larger schools. Many schools that I was asked about tended to be the larger ones, such as McGill or the University of British Columbia, but they were also, you know, interested in smaller schools as well, and so that's why I suggest, you know, taking a look at what's available and what's out there, because there really is a diverse array of different types of universities in Canada.
And when you came back, you went to the Glover Park Group, if I'm not mistaken, at some point.
Yes, well, I came back initially after graduating from Toronto and worked at the embassy. Then I went to graduate school at Tufts University, and then came back to DC and worked at the Glover Park Group, and now at the World Bank. And I'm guessing where this is leading, which is, you know, how my degree was viewed by an American audience and by American employers. So by asking that question to myself, I'll now answer it, which is that it was very highly regarded. You know, people here in the United States recognized the Canadian schools are of a high quality, and there really were no issues. People were more interested in why I chose Canada and in hearing about my experience rather than dwelling on, you know, how it compared necessarily. I think there was an understanding that, you know, Canadian schools are of very high caliber.
And did some of your colleagues at any of those places come from other universities in other countries as well?
No, not that I can. At the Canadian Embassy, obviously, they came many from Canada, but at these other places, I haven't met any from other countries.
Well, and if we can globalize this a little bit, in terms of other students who are coming from the United States going to Canada, how do they fare in terms of graduate school and jobs, not just for people who, you know, are interested in Washington, D.C.?
Mm-hmm. Again, speaking personally from the students that I've either recruited or have been in touch with from the U.S., and not just in the U.S., from all around the world. At the University of Toronto, for example, we have over 11,000 international students from over 130 different countries. So we certainly, our campus reflects the diversity of the city. And if students were to come and study at the University of Toronto, you need to obtain a study permit, which is a very simple process, especially for U.S. students. But once they graduate, they are allowed to stay in Canada for up to 3 years. And what we're finding is that a lot of those U.S. kids will end up getting employment within those 3 years, and a lot of them will then go through the process of becoming a permanent resident. And if the company you work for really likes you and wants you to stay, they're going to help to expedite that process. So again, speaking generally, the students that I know, they tend to want to stay and have that opportunity within that 3-year agreement that we have, and usually end up staying longer. So I think that's one of the main reasons.
Fair enough. And you mentioned the city of Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Can you compare the city of Toronto to, let's say, New York City?
Yeah, and I often do that with students. So I will say, if they have not visited Toronto, I'll say think of New York City on a smaller, cleaner, safer scale. And usually they laugh at that, but when I speak to Americans, they'll say, yeah, it kind of reminded me of New York on a smaller scale. Chicago is another city that would, I guess, remind a lot of people that have visited both. Say, yeah, it was kind of like Chicago, New York. So it's got the excitement, it's got the action, it's got the diversity, everything you'd be looking for in a large cosmopolitan city. But I think Alex could verify that, you know, very friendly, safe, clean environment. But
yeah, I mean, it's often, I've heard it referred to as New York run by the Swiss. And I think that that's rather appropriate, actually, because as Adam was saying, it's a little bit smaller, cleaner, and safer, but it really has that sort of vibrant, dynamic feel to it. You know, it has a lot of ethnic neighborhoods and great restaurants. I mean, you have Little Italy, Little Portugal, and Greek Town, and Little India, Koreatown. I mean, you have all of these great ethnic enclaves with their, you know, their histories, their cultures, their food. You also have great nightlife, entertainment, the arts, and you know, the music scene is fantastic. I mean, it's really got everything that you could want in a city, and then the campus itself is right in the middle of the city, but it's this sort of oasis of learning with, you know, the leafy quads and ivy adorned, you know, old buildings that makes you really feel like you're on a college campus, and it's great. So you have that opportunity to study in that environment, but then, you know, when you want a break, you can, you know, take a walk off campus and head to Chinatown.
When, besides going to Chinatown, what about the plays, the theater scene? How is that in Toronto?
I mean, I think it's excellent, but I would turn it over to the actor here at the table, or former actor.
yes, I think we have the third largest theater district. It's either in the English-speaking world, or there's some stat that I'm probably messing up, but it's a very large theater following or district in Toronto. And it's not just, we have the larger scale, so you can see your musical theaters. We have that. King Street is kind of where all the big theaters are. But what I love about Toronto, and if you're a theater enthusiast, is we have great smaller theaters, like Factory Theatre, Theatre Passe Muraille, Tarragon. These are smaller. They put on some gritty dramas, some hilarious comedies, and it's accessible. So for any students that like that, or just a visitor to the city, we have, most of these theaters have pay what you can Sundays. So for their matinee show, you can just show up, get a rush ticket, and pay what you can, whether that's $1, whether that's $2, to see a great show. So very healthy theater environment in Toronto. And for those that are into films too, I would also say the Toronto International Film Festival is the second largest film festival in the world, and that takes place in September, right when classes are starting. So a lot of our students at U of T will actually volunteer for the film festival and be able to rub elbows with those celebrities, and it's a really exciting time of year. So arts in general in Toronto, very healthy scene.
Okay, and if you don't mind me just getting off the script a little bit, you really were at Second City. I think you're the first person who's ever come on the show from Second City.
Yes, I really was. I spent a few years training there, and then worked at Tony and Tina's wedding, which was kind of a interactive dinner theater experience, which was great training, and then did the conservatory at Second City and worked for their touring company as well. So got to experience the arts firsthand as an actor in the city.
And you gave that up to work at the University of Toronto.
Well, it's a little bit of both. You know, acting can be tough. There was a point in my career where things weren't going, or the phone wasn't ringing off the hook. So an opportunity was presented to me to do a contract position for the University of Toronto recruiting students, where I was told I'd get to travel, speak to students about the university, and use my skill set as an actor, which was primarily public speaking. So I thought, that sounds great. I'd love to do that. And that sort of parlayed into a full-time position, and here I am today, years later, still recruiting and loving it, getting to travel around the world, mostly within the US, but I love coming into the States and speaking with prospective students and sharing my experiences studying in Toronto and really selling the city, because I am passionate about where I live and the university that I work for and studied at. So, but I still will dabble in acting. I do things from time to time, just not as, it's more of a hobby now than a career.
Well, fair enough. In terms of students who you meet in the United States, how would you compare the backgrounds that students have had academically to the students from Canada in terms of their high schools?
That's a great question. It's very comparable. I guess one of the main differences is when it comes to science, students in Ontario at least will have 11th grade of chemistry, for example, and 12th grade, and that would be the requirement for you to study sciences at the university. Whereas here I could meet a student that might have taken chemistry in grade 10 and that's all they've pursued. So there are some differences, but primarily the students that I meet with at the schools that we visit, for example, have the qualifications, have what we're looking for, a competitive GPA, the appropriate test scores, and you know, a requirement for us is at least having 2 APs. If they didn't have 2 APs, we'd want them to have 2 subject tests. Very rarely is that met with, oh, I don't have that. 95% of the time when I explain what we're looking for, the students say, yep, I've got that, and I'm competitive.
Well, and Alex, when you were a student at Toronto, did you find that your background academically was more or less the same as other students?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I felt like it was a seamless transition, and that my experience as a college student was exactly the same as my friends who were going to school in the States. So I felt I was, fully equipped, and that the experience was really very, very similar.
And do you get back to Toronto for alumni events?
I get back to see my friends more than anything, because most of my friends still live in the city, and so it's great to go back and and see them and visit the city, the old stomping grounds, and no, it's great. I love the city.
And what about social life? One of the things that when we talk about American schools is often a difference between a school that has a lot of fraternities and sororities, or schools that have a focus on a particular type of social aspects. How would you look at that?
Sure. Well, I think that Toronto is unique in that because it's in the city, your social life tends to exist within that city, and because it's such a diverse place, you can really find whatever you're looking for, whatever you like to do. I mean, personally, I enjoyed staying on campus to play sports and obviously to study and go to class, but then afterwards going out to bars and clubs and restaurants and plays and music venues, and really just experiencing Toronto, experiencing the world. I mean, I think that's part of also about what going to college is about, is sort of finding yourself and growing up, and I was really lucky to be able to do that in Toronto.
Yeah, and I would add that there certainly is Greek life at the University of Toronto, but not on the scale that you would find at most U.S. colleges. And another big difference would be, even though we are Canada's largest university and we have a football team, football is not a huge factor or a way of life as it is in several big U.S. colleges. Our students would maybe go to the football game for half of it and then go down the street and participate in one of the arts festivals that could be happening. So I think Alex nailed it, that being a big city, there's lots to do. People aren't just focused on one area like Greek life, like the big football scene, but rather doing a little bit of everything, or whatever your interests are, because being a big city, being a big school, chances are we're going to have something that you're interested or passionate about.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add on to that, I really enjoy sports. I like watching sports, playing sports, coaching sports. So I was unsure at first what my experience was going to be like, because again, friends going to school in the U.S., you go to college game, you go to the football game or basketball game, every week, and I felt like I would be missing out on that. But ultimately, I was able to play a lot more sports and be able to watch sports, because there are a lot of sports teams and professional sports teams in Toronto.
Albeit
so I was able to,
terrible teams, but we do have them.
Well, that's true. That's true. So you can see the competition when they come in to dominate these teams.
Exactly.
But no, I think that it provides a different experience, and perhaps as you have heard on the show or said on the show, I mean, every individual is different. Every student is looking for something slightly different, and so there are some who the most important aspect of their education is going to be going to the sporting events. There may be other interests that other students may have, and so I think that Toronto provides the opportunity to do a lot of different things.
Well, you mentioned watching events on TV as part of your answer, which I think is interesting and very interesting. But I am always struck by the TV of the weather in the United States. It almost seems as if all the storms end at the Canadian-U.S. border. So what happens to the weather, part A, and then part B is, how are we supposed to get more students from the United States to seriously consider going to Quebec or Toronto or British Columbia if they don't even see the cities on the weather map?
Well, if I can answer a part before Part A, I was actually referring to going to games, because you have the Maple Leafs hockey team, you have the Toronto Raptors, you have the Toronto Blue Jays. So there are, I mean, you have Toronto FC, the soccer team. So I'm actually talking about going to the games as opposed to, going to professional games as opposed to just simply watching them from the couch. But for weather-related issues, I'll let Adam handle that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a funny point. And that's a question that I'll get asked by students often is, well, it's really cold up in Canada. How cold does it get? And I encourage students to look at a map and see where we're located, because actually Toronto is a little bit further south than some of the U.S. states. We kind of dip down. So the easiest thing to remember is our weather is very comparable to New York. So if there's a snowstorm in New York, chances are we've either got it already or we're going to be getting that storm as well. So certainly there's parts of Canada up north that are colder, but when you're looking at southern Ontario where we're located, it's not nearly as bad as people might think. So, and if you're out on the West Coast in British Columbia, you're really close to Seattle. So you're going to get that West Coast, lots of rain, but not nearly as cold as well. So, and then in the middle part, Alberta, Saskatchewan, those are a little colder, more snow heavy. So it's not nearly as bad as people think or as cold.
But certainly people must ask you that a lot.
They do, yes, they do.
Well, but if we can turn then to the issue of the specific schools in Canada. Mm-hmm. So let's assume that I was in New York, or I was in Philadelphia, or Boston, or Washington, and I was looking at just Canadian schools. What are the schools that overlap the most with the University of Toronto?
In Canada. Definitely, I think Alex mentioned earlier that McGill is very well known here in the U.S. They're an outstanding public university as well. British Columbia, I often would travel with a representative from the University of British Columbia, because we are very similar as far as size, as far as being research-intensive universities, but on two different coasts. So it was nice for us to travel together, because we would be able to speak with students who might be looking at either coast. So UBC would be right up there as far as being an excellent school. McGill in Quebec. Montreal's got that very European style or flavor, so for those students that might be looking at that. But then you go to the East Coast, to Nova Scotia, to Newfoundland, to New Brunswick. There's some great maritime universities and a different way of life out there as well. And I know definitely there's also a lot of interest in Saskatchewan and Alberta, the universities there for the mining and students that might be interested in that. Definitely a lot of jobs in that regard too. So there's some great options throughout the entire country, depending on if you're looking for that bigger city feel, like Montreal, like Toronto, like Vancouver, or a smaller university community or feel like Dalhousie in Halifax, or the University of Alberta in Alberta. So there's some great options, and depending on maybe the environment and if you want that bigger feel, cosmopolitan city or smaller university town.
And what about study abroad? Let's assume an American student goes to the University of Toronto and they want to study abroad. How would that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I love to speak about that as well, because I actually, as a student, studied abroad. So we have 152 different university exchange partners that our students can travel, see the world, get university credit for either a full year exchange, a half year, or a summer abroad. And there's 6 continents where you can to choose from. So when I was a third-year student, I went to Siena, Italy, and I took a Renaissance course with Ken Bartlett, who is one of the university's top professors. And it was a fantastic summer experience for me, because we would have class from Monday to Thursday, and on Fridays we would hop up on a bus and go to cities that surrounded Siena, where we were based. And I got to see Florence, Rome, Venice, and see the things and sites that we were just talking about in the classroom a few days earlier, and have this very highly regarded, knowledgeable professor as our personal tour guide. So that was such a unique learning experience for me that I always try to promote that to students. And I also studied in Oxford, England the following summer, took a Shakespeare course. So if you like that idea of traveling, seeing the world, but also getting university credit, we have an office dedicated just to that. And as an international student from the US studying in Toronto, you absolutely could do that as part of your undergraduate experience.
And if I can just add to that, I also did a summer program in Oxford with Professor Kenneth Bartlett, and can attest to the fact that he is an excellent educator, and it was a wonderful experience. And then, you know, I would often be asked, well, are you going to do a semester abroad, or are you going to do a year abroad? And I thought, well, I'm actually doing my entire education abroad, so I'm enjoying this, and you know, I'll travel during the summer. I might, you know, take a course and get credit during the summer, but you know, this is an amazing opportunity to be in Toronto, so I'm just going to enjoy it.
Terrific. Well, we only have another minute or two left. Maybe if we can just ask a quick question about financial aid. How would an American student qualify for financial aid if they were to go to Toronto or another Canadian school?
Sure. There's several universities in Toronto that, or excuse me, in Canada that have an agreement with the U.S. government. So Title IV schools where direct loans such as FAFSA are portable into Canada. So there are options. It's different in the sense that we wouldn't be offering a complete financial aid package like you might receive from a U.S. college, because the financial aid packages as a whole are reserved for Canadian students. But as I said, there are a lot of schools in Canada that do have this agreement where those direct loans are portable. And certainly on our website, if that's a concern or something you'd like to research, click on financial aid, click on U.S. loans, and it's going to kind of tell you all the options that are available to you.
Any last bit of advice?
I would say that if anyone's interested, Canada's a great place. Visit the country, you'll love it. Specifically Toronto, we are about 560 miles from here, so you've driven it about 8-9 hour drive.
Yep.
And there is very reasonable flights. One airline that I would plug is Porter Airlines. It's a Toronto-based airline company that flies from Dulles into downtown Toronto, our island airport. So you literally land right at the base of the city. It's about an hour and 10-minute flight. It's very affordable and a great way for you to visit the city. You'll love it, and check out our campus if you can as well.
Yeah, and I would just say, yeah, consider Canada.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
If you would like additional information about Adam Lotesto or Alex Leipziger, please visit utoronto.com or cic.gc.ca. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.